Hello, everyone, and welcome to Playing with Game Design. It's a discussion with Chris Bateman, and thank you so much for being here, Chris.
It's my pleasure, Konstantinos.
And yep, and thank you everyone for being here with us. Now, I'm Konstantinos Mopoulos. I am a game designer, game urbanist, and mainly lecturer at Discworld Learning, who's also organizing this event. And we are here mainly to pick Chris's mind on game design, games, and all the related subjects that both I and he, and hopefully also you from the chat would feel like. So, speaking of the chat, feel free to drop any questions, any comments. I will pass them on to Chris, whenever it feels appropriate. Also, let me remind you that you can find the D6 Learning site over at thisislearning.com, which is a chat, which is a link I've just pasted into the chat, and I will also paste our Discord server into the chat. And now I do not want to bore you too much with the introductory things, so I will not. I will just say, yeah, that Chris is someone who has been creating games for almost 30 years, right? Maybe even more than that.
Yeah, I mean, it depends where you start. In fact, the closest I got to my first published game happened in '92, which is, oh goodness, can I do the maths on that? So 30, is that
It's
30?
it's
4
33,
years ago.
34. Okay,
Yeah,
yeah.
that was a tabletop board game. I won a design competition for Task Force Games, who had a backdoor Star Trek license, and they needed ideas, and I submitted this game, Starfleet Officers, which was an auction-based mission game set in in Task Force Games version of the Star Trek universe. It's a really good game, actually. It didn't proceed for whatever reason, but that was as close as I got to being my first published game back in '92. Yeah.
It's amazing. I mean, it's also amazing the fact that I never knew that you started from tabletop games, to be honest.
Well, you see,
I
started in tabletop games. I mean, yes. I mean, I published several tabletop role-playing games before I worked in video games. I had never seriously considered video games while I was at university, despite studying computer science and artificial intelligence.
Mhm.
Video games I hadn't really seriously considered. I was absolutely besotted with tabletop role-playing games. But then when Magic the Gathering came out and sort of sucked all of the money out of the tabletop role-playing game space, it just didn't look viable to launch a tabletop
That's
role-playing game company. So, I mean, I had a small publisher called Discworld Incorporated where we published.
mhm.
It depends how you count them. Certainly three rule book length things, but then we also published things like Contract, which was a one-page role-playing game, which
You did that back then. That
yeah.
is
I really like Contract. Actually, it's an incredibly lightweight storytelling role-playing game which uses poker chips rather than dice. For the story,
Mhm.
your characters have a set of poker chips for their abilities, and so you commit poker chips into it, and the games master decides narratively how appropriate the thing that yours is, and refunds you poker chips on that basis. So you can achieve amazing things, but then you run out of poker chips, and you're not quite able to deliver later in the story. A really interesting lightweight game.
okay.
That
Can I ask you whether those games, like any of your like really early 90s tabletop games, are anywhere available? Are they
Yeah,
like
I have loads of remaindered copies of Avatar and Shifter. I don't believe there are any copies remaining of Outlands, which is our Deep Space Far Future
I
sci-fi role-playing game. But both
I'm
Shifter and Avatar exist in paper copies, but this is low budget stuff. I mean, the quality of it is comparable to. Do you remember Maelstrom? Do you know tabletop role playing games
yes,
at all? Yeah. So you
yes, a
remember the
lot.
quality of Maelstrom, which was very cheaply printed, or for that matter, the first edition of Tunnel and Trolls, which was unbelievably cheap. So the Discordia Incorporated role playing games are pretty cheaply produced, but these were my first published games, and yeah, I still have copies of Avatar and of Shifter. A few years back, I was at an event in Liverpool, and I gave some copies of that to be auctioned in a charity auction, and that was the last time those saw the light of day, I think.
That's amazing. That's amazing, and that also sort of helps you understand how you actually got into video games. I mean, so you did start despite your status as a game designer and as someone who creates worlds to be played in, and you were forced due to the nastiness of what Magic the Gathering did to tabletop games for a while
Don't get me
into
wrong. I was a Magic the Gathering player myself. In fact, I was a highly ranked British tournament player. I won several
where
British tournaments with Magic the Gathering.
I could
In fact,
never.
when my wife and I moved house, this place here is my nuclear-proof bunker in Tennessee. But I've lived most of my life with my wife in Manchester, where the company is based. But when we made the move this time, we had to get insurance on everything that was shipped over. And to my surprise, the most valuable thing I own is my collection of Magic the Gathering cards, which is worth
Okay.
tens of thousands of dollars. I have my most valuable card is called Tabernacle at Pendrell Vale, which was in the Legends set and is worth
Okay.
thousands of dollars by itself.
I
And I've got
I
a large number of dual lands as well, which are worth hundreds of dollars a piece. So
that's
yeah, so to my surprise, those are the most valuable things that I own.
amazing.
So
You
I
know,
don't begrudge Magic the
hmm,
Gathering from existing because I got sucked into it myself. But it was apparent to me that
hmm,
going into tabletop role playing games at that point in time was an opportunity to lose money. So yeah, I
yeah.
was looking for other jobs. I applied for all sorts of jobs. At the same time, I got the offer to work at Perfect Entertainment, where I worked on the
Hmm.
Discworld games. I had a job offer to be a programmer for a London-based firm of accountants. If the timing of those had gone differently, my life could have gone down a very different
Yes.
path.
Yes, they're both technical jobs.
Yes.
Still, yes. I mean, but seriously, before we move on, I have to admit that I do begrudge Magic the Gathering for killing off a perfectly fine Roll Master campaign because everyone sort of switched to that thing, and I was very sad.
So you like games with very, very detailed tables, I'm guessing, if you're a
I
Rollmaster
used
player.
to. I would find it impossible to play the thing right now. Like,
I always found Rollmaster to be using a sledgehammer to crack an egg.
yeah, it's
Uh,
not a good game. It's not a good game. But
but
when you're,
it had character, right? At the
it
time
had
Rollmaster came out, there was a lot of character to that depth of detail. There was something seductive about that depth of detail to
so,
it.
and we have to tell people for watching us that Rollmaster was this role playing, this tabletop role playing game that came with a ton of tables for each weapon. Each weapon had their own tables of critical hits and critical misses and all sorts of things, and it involved a lot of looking up at things and a lot of rolling dice. Yeah.
Yes. Well, the rolling dice was the fun part of it. I never got to play Rollmaster, but I did play Middle Earth Roleplay, which used a strimmed down version
It was
of
a
it.
much better version.
Yeah, well, it was
Yeah.
very streamlined. But the thing that always amused me about it was that the critical hit results were independent from the weapons used. So in one
Yeah.
game, I remember that an orc was killed by a paper aeroplane because the paper aeroplane got a critical hit, and the critical hit table indicated that it killed them instantly, as if the paper airplane had burrowed into their eyeball and killed them in a fluke hit,
Yeah.
which I just thought was hilarious.
And the thing is that all those they also had some very funny entries, like your arrow pierces their head, and it comes in from one ear and exits from the other, so all earwax are removed, and this type of really really adolescent humor. But still, this would work nicely in a video game. I mean, this type of detail and randomness would be fantastic when you have the computer doing the job.
It would
So anyway,
certainly be easier to run on the computer. Whether or not
yes.
all of that detail does you any favors in a computer role-playing game is a separate question.
Yeah, that's
Yeah, yeah.
that is true. So you started with actually working on the first Discworld games, right? Missing, Presumed, and
Well, actually,
no.
when I got hired to work at Perfect,
Hmm.
they were tying up the second game, and
Okay.
although I supported that process for a long time, they hired me because they knew that they could use me at some point. But for a long time, the company just sort of ticked along around me. In fact, the earliest things I remember doing at Perfect was flushing dead goldfish down the toilet, which nobody else wanted to do. The glamorous work that is flushing dead goldfish. I also helped. I had a little bit of Japanese language skills, and we were doing a lot of
Mhm.
porting, and so I would supervise to make sure that the subtitles matched the videos in the games by listening to the Japanese version and checking that they were all correct. It was extremely unglamorous work in the early days.
Okay, I can imagine that.
Yeah.
But well, okay, that was interesting. And so, and then from then on, you stay there and you work there for a while, right?
From 95 to when they more or less closed up shop in the 99. I mean, I think they were actually still running in 2000, but I'd gone to the US for the first time. Well, not to visit, but I'd gone to the US to live for the first time in 2000 when the company was in its death throes. The thing is,
Mhm.
we made point and click adventures, and point and click adventures were great in the 90s. But then after the failure of Grim Fandango,
Yeah.
and probably more to the point, the success of Quake, the market just changed, and publishers didn't want point and click adventures. They
Yeah.
wanted games with guns.
Yeah.
And, yeah.
Again, something I still begrudge.
Yes. Well,
Like,
but the thing is, the technology was ideally suited to those kinds of visceral
it's true.
gun games, and
It's
and
true.
I think that has a large part to do with the success of the FPS during that era. It was one of the few things you could do over the narrow bandwidth that you had in the internet at the time. Or for that, never mind internet, the local networks, because we played Quake sometimes at lunchtimes when I was at Perfect, and it was just those kinds of games were suited to that kind of setup. It was quite difficult in
Mhm.
the 90s to do much with networking, but you didn't need much information transferred for gun games, and so they were well
That's
suited,
true.
and they were visceral and exciting. And although I generally prefer other kinds of games. I do have a lot of respect for the gun game, which I think is a genuine sort of creative achievement in video games, even if they've somewhat stagnated recently. But you know,
No, that is right. And design wise, they can be very interesting too, and
yeah.
certainly. But yeah, still
But you're
the
still bitter at all the fun things that didn't
I
get made because the gun games got money,
exactly,
right?
and I'm also very, very, very irritated by the fact that specifically games like, and I'm talking about Discworld Noir, Gabriel Knight 3, and Grim Fandango didn't get the recognition and the mass appeal that they should have.
Well, they got the recognition, they just didn't get the mass appeal. Both Discworld Noir and Grim Fandango won Game of the Year awards in various different places.
That's
They just
true. They
didn't make
did.
the
They
money.
did. Critically, they did excellently. You're so right. So anyway,
Critical
yeah,
successes, but commercial failures. At a time that video game revenues were rising, and so publishers were really interested in what are the games that are going to turn over
mm,
more money.
that's true.
Honestly, the point and click era is a great little snatch of history, but those games had severe limits to what audience could play them, and
That's
the
true.
stuff that was coming through could be played by a wider audience. Goldeneye is the poster child for the wider audience. When that sold 8 million, people hadn't really thought of 8 million as a realistic sales figure for a video game to hit. Yeah, so
That's, that is
yeah,
true. That is true. It's a commercial thing, truly. And anyway,
I
so
think
you,
I also have bitterness here about early days of video games. We might touch upon this a little bit later, but as a child of the arcade, it was 3D destroying 2D that I was bitter about
yeah,
because I really like sprite-based games. I really like the old 8-bit, 16-bit arcade games, and the arrival of the 3D, and especially then the native 3D that because the thing that made the PlayStation work was and the Saturn, they were both designed to shift
yeah,
polygons and render in 3D. And
and
it's
texture them also,
sorry.
and to actually texture them, not just
Yeah,
have them.
absolutely. And because, of course, there were sort of shaded polygonal
Hmm.
games before that. For that matter, wireframe polygonal stuff like Elite, or I really like the 1979 Tail Gunner arcade cabinet. It was very obscure, but it's beautiful with its little
I,
wireframe ships.
I can imagine how it would look, but I've somehow never run across it,
I
which
seek this one
is.
out. It is emulated on the common arcade emulators.
Hmm.
The company that made it no longer exists, so as far as I'm concerned, it's in the public domain. Although legally it may not be in the public domain,
Which,
but
yeah, I imagine this is not out of
functionally
public.
it's in the public domain, and you can always claim fair use, which will defend you a fair degree. Check it out. It's the 1979 Tail Gunner. I think it's an
I
absolute work of genius. Especially the fact that it's in 1979 is part of the joy of that game, because it's amazing what they were able to achieve on basically a toilet roll and some shoestring. It's
yeah,
yeah.
that's what the technology back then could afford to. So, sorry, back to you then. So, Perfect Entertainment isn't doing as well. You still, however, decide to stick to video games,
Well,
and
you say decide to stick to video games. I mean, what else could I do? It's all I'd done since university was make
I
video
imagine
games.
programming for accounting software or something
Oh
like
God, no!
that.
Having dodged that bullet once, nobody willingly goes back and impales themselves on a bullet that they dodged. Right?
That is very true. That is very
But,
true.
but though, honestly, the true story of the origin of International Hobo is less the demise of Perfect Entertainment, although it's part of the circumstances, but that I fell in love with an American woman and I needed to be able to go and visit the US legally. And so I set up a UK based company that could be my employer so that I could enter the US without creating green card difficulties because I was working for a UK company. And
So I
this is the
hobo.
reason. This is the reason the company is called International Hobo, because for the entire first year of the company is me and a laptop. And I not only don't have an office, I don't even have a home because I left my house in London to move to Tennessee, where my wife was studying at UT Knoxville, and I didn't have home to come back to in the UK. So every time I had to leave the US after 90 days when my visa expired, I had to ask one of my friends if they could put me up for 30 days before I could legally return to the US.
This is amazing, and you're one of the few people who can actually argue that their company was born of love, and be honest about it.
It absolutely was
It's
born of love. Yes.
it's amazing. So anyway, I will be posting a link to iHobo, and since it's a very unique company, and it's not something you run into every day. Could you um, sort of explain what it is that you're doing there?
Yeah. I mean, the original idea for International Hobo, we talked about the hardware coming in the 90s. The Saturn and the PlayStation came with a CD drive, and a lot of data fit onto those drives. And so companies were largely listening to screenwriters in Hollywood that this data storage should be used for making films, and you should cut your gameplay with film content, basically. Which I'm sure it had nothing to do with the fact that the screenwriters were looking to get paid to write the little short films that would go along with it. But the people who I founded the company with, we felt this was not the best way to do video game content. Not that cutscenes don't have a role in games, but that if all you plan for your story materials is cutscenes, it's not a great way of developing video game stories. So we had this idea that we would put people who had worked in video game design alongside people who had conventional narrative skills under the same roof. And we would, as we pretentiously said at the time, we would develop a new language for video game storytelling, and it's from this that this idea of narrative design came. And Jason Della Rocca press ganged me into running the IGDA's game writing special interest group, which didn't exist at the time. And this term narrative design spread out through the video games industry, which is a wonderful thing to be able to claim, although I've gained zero benefit from having contributed this term to the industry. So in the early days of the company, we were offering both game design and narrative design services and script writing, but it was far easier then to sell the narrative design and script writing services because game developers largely thought they knew what they were doing in game design, but knew they knew nothing about stories. And so for a long time, the bulk of our work was in storytelling. But if we look at Nikos, can I get the slide up? Is that?
Yep, I think.
That's on. I have no way of telling whether it's on.
Nope, you have no way. That is true.
Can anyone confirm that slide is on?
Well, I
It's
imagine.
on. Sorry, I'm being very unprofessional here.
No, that's fine. That's fine.
It's supposed to happen seamlessly, but of course, nothing works seamlessly. So here is a selection of the games that we worked on. A lot of these we worked on story materials, but we always offered game design services. And you can see in the top row there, the Discworld, Noir, Ghostmaster, Cult, Heretic Kingdoms, Shadows, Heretic Kingdoms. Those were all games that we did the narrative design, script, and game design for. But in somewhere down the line, I want to say it was around in the run up to the 2020s. We were getting to the point where the market was starting to move. The market was starting to really support lightweight indie games better, and the story content was becoming. Although we still provide story services, it looked to us like there was going to be less demand on that front, and for that matter, more writers around, and therefore more competition for the writing work. So we started to push the design side more, and we developed this service, this design audit service, which is the bulk of our work at the moment. We work largely for mid-tier publishers, but also for indies who have smart indies is one way of putting it. And what we do with the design audits is we look at work in progress builds. We look at alphas, betas, vertical slices, and we send very detailed reports saying this is what's working in the game. This stuff's great. Carry on working on this. This thing that you were trying to pay off, that's currently not working. You can try these things to fix it, or perhaps you could phase it out of the design and save those development resources for another part of the project. So it's like a compass reading for the project. It gives critical feedback, but we don't tell them what to do. We just say, this is what's working and not working. These are the solutions we would explore if it was us. But it's entirely modular, so it's entirely up to the developer to decide how to proceed on it. And this is very popular with the publishers, but it's also very popular with the indie clients. The indie clients have really started to trust us to get them a compass reading at a relatively early build, to lay out options that they may or may not already have considered for how the project goes. And because video games run so inefficiently and very rarely run on time, being able to very early on look at the game and say, this stuff is working, but this stuff isn't, and you probably don't need this, so you could cut it, or you could try this, and this might make it work. That kind of compass reading turns out to be really helpful.
Yeah, I mean, especially as I imagine, having someone from outside who's not, your aunt or your good friend who's into, football, actually have someone who knows what they're talking about come and look at your project with fresh eyes and
Yeah,
no previous preconception. That's incredibly helpful.
this was our intuition in the first place, was that support for that simply didn't exist, because most publishers relied on their internal processes for review. But the people internally, they'd been following the projects for a while. They knew what they were intended to be, and you end up projecting into the project things that you're expecting it to be, whether or not it's there. And also, many games do not play the way that you expect them to when put in the hands of a player who's never seen them before. That exterior perspective, the view from afar, is kind of invaluable. And like I say, that's been a core part of what we've done at International Hobo. And
And I imagine that this also sort of exposes you to a huge variety of design approaches, of development approaches, of art styles. Of You see all sorts of different things from all sorts of different teams, right?
yeah, absolutely. I mean, it turns out, unsurprisingly, I've worked on a lot of role-playing games, which is unsurprising since my background was in tabletop role-playing and design. But I've worked on a huge range of projects, and it's been really good fun. One of the best things about my job is not knowing what we're going to be looking at next, if you see what I mean. The immense variety of the stuff that comes across my desk is one of the most fun parts about what I do. And some of the stuff's really surprising. So on the third row there on the left, Bratz Rock Angels, that is, I believe, my biggest selling game. Of all the games I've worked on, I think that was a multi-million selling game. Sold more than anything else. And we got the design job for that, and the narrative design job for that, because literally nobody else wanted it, because it was for tween girls, and literally nobody knew how to design for tween girls. And when that landed on my desk, it was like, excellent. So there's an audience here. We don't know how to make games for them. So we'll find out what tween girls enjoy playing, and then we can design a game that picks up those play activities. I really enjoyed working on that, and the fact that it was a big hit is actually really cool. But the best thing about it is, a few years ago, when I did a guest lecture somewhere at a university in the UK. I forget where, sadly. I do a lot of guest lectures and I can't get them straight. And in the audience were people who had played it as kids and who really enjoyed it, and they came up to me afterwards and said, "Oh, I played Backshot Angels. It was really good fun." That really made my day. Yeah, that really made me happy.
Okay, so what I wanted to also say here is that do all those different projects also give you material for writing, and I mean mainly for writing your game design books and
Well, as you're well aware, I have spent quite a bit of time writing as well.
Mhm,
The nature of the work that I do at International Hobo is that we're busy in bursts, right? So spring and
mhm.
autumn are usually very busy, autumn in particular, because everyone's trying to get stuff done before the end of the year. But over the summer, things tend to go a little bit quieter. not least of which because some of our European clients seem to disappear on holiday over the summer and never return. But so I've ended up doing quite a lot of writing on the side, which I really enjoy, and it's unsurprising because a lot of what I've done with the company has been writing. So on the top row there you can see
Mhm.
the games books that I've written, and most recently I managed to secure a second edition of our anthology game writing narrative skills for video games, which you are in the second edition, Constantinos, as well.
And
You
it's
know,
also here.
yeah.
Yes, I know. It's a fantastic book, I have to say.
So I'd really enjoyed writing the first one, which I had a whole bunch of different writers contributing chapters covering very, very different techniques. And I like that about it. It was an anthology which gave a really
Mhm.
broad perspective of what game writing was. But it was effectively out of print because the publisher that we worked for originally was bought by a larger publisher, who was then immediately bought by a larger publisher, and so I fought for years to get the rights so that I could get a second edition, and then for further years to persuade Bloomsbury that they wanted to print the second edition, which I did eventually. Check all of their boxes and survive their trial by fire and Hunger Games of publishing, and get the second edition of Game Writing Narrative Skills for Video Games out. But that was an enormous relief. I'm very grateful to my friend and colleague Neil, who was with me at International Hobo when we founded, and I don't think I could have done it if I didn't have him as my wingman. To be honest, because if nothing else, I needed someone to swear with when things went wrong. And then, in addition to the game stuff, I also I got involved in writing philosophy books because I enjoy the challenges in philosophy, and so I did this trilogy of books, which are called my imaginative investigations for Zero books, which are about the role of imagination in different aspects of human life. And I did one a year, and then realised that literally nobody was going to read books if I was going to be cranking out a tome every year. So I decided to work on smaller books, and so Wikipedia Knows Nothing and The Virtuous Cyborg are shorter, more accessible works of philosophy. And speaking of second editions, I'm really, really excited that I get a second edition of Wikipedia Knows Nothing this year, which is not exactly an attack on the Wikipedia. It is asking us to question what we mean by knowledge. What does it mean to know? Right? I don't know if you've read Wikipedia Knows Nothing, Constantinos.
Nope.
No,
Nope.
you should give it a go. It's short. It won't take
I
you long.
know.
You'll read it in a day, and I'm really pleased with this one. It's a great entry point for my philosophy.
So
It's
it's
not
it's
hard to read. It's only small, and the
okay.
publisher traditionally has provided it as a free PDF. So even money isn't an excuse not to
Yeah.
get involved.
So I mean, it's even shorter than the Virtue Cyborg, which is very, very
Virtuous Cyborg's
well.
relatively short.
Yeah, it's
That's my
short.
book of technology ethics.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's short, certainly compared to Chaos Ethics, which is a bloody mountain. But Wikipedia Knows Nothing is the shortest of them. It's a relatively easy read, and it challenges you to think about what it means to know. What philosophers
It's
call epistemology. I'm
ex-
really pleased with it, and I'm delighted that second edition has a foreword by the Nietzsche scholar Babette Babich, who is absolutely wonderful, and she wrote this absolutely wild. Well, actually, right, I should share this story because she wrote me a foreword, and then afterwards she wrote me a postscript to a foreword, and the postscript to the foreword was this unbelievable ramble about philosophy of science and knowledge. And I read the postscript and I thought, this is just too good. And so I'm not using her foreword. I'm only using the postscript to the foreword because it was just too good. Yeah. Anyway, right. Nobody really came here to talk about philosophy. We should talk about.
Actually, I have to point out that I'm not certain about the exact title of this project, but there's this epistemological video game, which is obviously a free one by Stefano Gualeni, who he is a
I know him. I
professor.
know him
Good,
well.
good. You
Yes.
know Stefano. So have you played? I think it's called. Is this soup or something like that, which is about exactly about how we define things and how we get to understand things. I will search it and paste it.
That reminds me, I should get into contact with him because I met him at a couple of events years back, and we got on very well. But I haven't
Yeah,
spoken to him in ages. Yeah,
he's
I should definitely get in touch with him.
actually. I
Yeah,
think that the two of you would have a lot to discuss. To be
we
honest,
have discussed a lot. Yes,
yeah, yeah.
we've argued very comprehensively about a whole bunch of philosophical topics. But I should definitely drop him a line. Thank you
Because I
for
mean,
reminding me about that. I,
nice.
the worst thing about I enjoy meeting lots of people, but the worst thing about meeting lots of people is not quite remembering everyone that I've met, if that makes any sense. It's
Yeah,
not that I've forgotten them, it's just there's so many of them.
yeah.
So I sometimes I'm at a conference. I was at, I want to say it was either GDC or Gamescom a few years back, and a person came up to me and said, I don't know if you remember me, and I did remember him. I couldn't remember what his name was. It's quite embarrassing not being able to remember names, but there must be 1,000, 2,000 faces in my head now, and I can't
Yeah,
separate them.
that
It's
that makes
it's kind
perfect
of
sense.
embarrassing. Yeah,
No,
kind of
it's not.
embarrassing.
I think people just understand it. It's that's why people tell you that. Okay, look, I imagine that you don't remember me. It makes perfect sense.
Yeah,
And so,
I'm honest about it. Is the thing. I do remember who I haven't met. It's just trying to pull names out. I find it very, very difficult. Very difficult. Yeah.
so having covered philosophy very, very quickly, do you think that there is an approach that you tend to have towards game design and storytelling in video games, and how you play with the creative side of things, or it's entirely project based?
So, 21st Century Game Design was one of the books that was up on that slide.
Hmm.
Um, my friend and colleague Richard Boone, who's another of the people who helped found International Hobo with me, he's elsewhere these days. He's gone gallivanting. But we wrote this article originally for Develop magazine called Zen Game Design, in which we postulated that there were methods for game design, but there was no master method for game design. That there was no one
Hmm.
correct way to do game design, and I still stand by that. I think that this is the case. There are a whole bunch of different methods for conducting game design and narrative design, but there's no set of requirements that forces one system of approach over all the others. If you work as an architect, the physics of buildings constrains what you can do,
Hmm.
right? And if you work as a game designer, human psychology and computer engineering are constraints on what you do, but human imagination being what it is, and computer programming being what it is, the scope of what you can do is just astronomical compared to what you can do in architecture, right? Architects have very, very severe constraints, whereas game designers, although we do have constraints, they really they barely limit us at all, right? So flexibility, I think, is really important.
Hmm.
And throughout my career in games, I've tried to resist the idea that there's a right and a wrong way of doing things. Rather, I think there are ways of thinking about problems that will help you find solutions to the problems that you've got, if you see what I mean. Um,
Right.
yeah. So there are definitely methods to game design, but I
Hmm.
also think that everyone has their own methods for
Hmm.
game design. And perhaps a little bit later, I'll touch on that theme a little bit more
Right.
in the context of something specific. So I think it's perhaps easier to see what I'm getting at when we can use some actual examples.
True, but I mean, my main question would be like, when you start building a game from scratch without a
Yeah.
brick or something, would there be something that you tend to think of first? Like, would you imagine a specific experience, a specific feeling, a an argument that you would like to make through the game, or again, is that entirely up to what?
I hate to say this, but I have bred out of myself the desire to want to make my own games simply because it's not practical for me to do so. Although International Hobo has done some unbelievable low budget games that we've
Thank you.
squeezed out on the side, which we'll surely talk about a little bit
Yes,
later.
this
So
is what I
we
was
have
getting
we
at.
have
Yeah.
done that, but the bottom line is video game development is expensive and time consuming, and I can't really be taking that on my own. So I view myself now more as a as an asset for other people to use in their projects, and I try not to let game ideas of my own get
Mm,
a life of their own because I'm not going to be able to capitalize on it, right?
right.
So it's all very well asking me how a project of my own will begin, but I actually am kind of resisting doing that.
Right.
So
Well, I think that you will have to answer this at some point for specific projects at the very least. So, Anyway, I mean, but still, I think that we could see an evolution of game design at least from the 80s to now, as it it gains theory, it gains those methods that you've been referring to. They didn't quite exist 40
Well,
years
they
ago
didn't
or
exist at
50.
all. The
Exactly.
great thing about the 8-bit era is that the people making games were not game designers because there was no such thing, or at least
Exactly. Exactly.
not working on the 8-bit things. You listen to interviews with the people who worked on the Japanese 8-bits, and they were engineers
Hmm.
figuring it out as they went along. Right? They were experimenting and making up as they go along. I think the 8-bit era is so much fun because nobody knows what they're doing, so anything goes. It's the Cambrian explosion of video games, right? We are
It's
not
true.
as inventive now as they were then because now we know what games are, or at least we think we do, and so we can't go off in completely wild directions.
My question, before actually asking you what you see as the future of game design, will be: do you remember the automata games?
Which one?
The automata games, like My Name is Uncle Groucho and you win a big fat cigar.
I,
No.
your accent is foxing me. Can you?
So there were a bunch of weird games, including My Name is Uncle Groucho and You Won a Big Fat Cigar, something like that. They were like
No.
mainly text adventures from the 80s. They mainly came out on the Spectrum.
Oh,
I
okay, okay.
think it was called Automata or Automata or something like that. Very,
No,
very weird
this is
type
one of
of.
those little rabbit holes that escaped me. I caught the
Yeah.
Neturosi on the PlayStation, and I caught a little bit of what was going on behind the scenes on the Commodore 64. But although I did play a lot of Spectrum games because my friend had a Spectrum game, I did not discover any underground games kicking around on the Spectrum. I'm excited to think that there are underground games that circulate on the Spectrum
Yes.
because my goodness, that machine was so restricted. I
It
mean,
was. I mean, you might know Mel Croucher, right?
yeah, Mel
Okay,
Croucher,
that
yeah.
was his company, and they made those incredibly surreal games. Like
Ah, so
Deus
the
Ex
Mel
Machina.
Croucher I know best is Deus Ex Machina,
Yeah,
which was
Deus
one of
Ex
the
Machina
very
is.
first art games ever
Yeah,
made.
yeah.
And wildly, you put. Do you know the game Deus Ex Machina?
Oh yes, yes, of course. I
Yeah.
mean,
Did you have it? Because of course, it came on. You came on
I know it
an
came with the
audio
tape. I
cassette,
know.
but you also put the audio cassette into a
Hmm.
cassette
Hmm.
player, and it would play the
Yeah,
soundtrack to the game as you
yes.
played it.
And,
Completely
and the
wild.
narration was by someone completely wild. I can't remember who, but I think
John Pertwee, who was the third Doctor in Doctor Who.
yeah,
Yeah.
something like that.
I nearly got
Anyways,
to work with John Pertwee. I nearly got to work with
oh
John Pertwee
god.
because he worked on the first Discworld game, but he died, and I didn't get to work with him. I did
Ah,
work with the fourth Doctor with Tom Baker on the Heretic Kingdoms games, but I just missed working with John Pertwee, which would have been great.
still, but
I
I mean
try not
this.
to have regrets, but I would have liked to have worked with John
Yeah,
Pertwee. Yeah.
and I mean this is some. I still feel that what you said about the 8-bit era is very accurate. It was incredibly wild. People did things that they didn't know couldn't be done.
Yeah,
So that's
it's any medium when it's kicked off. Nobody knows what they're doing, so you make it up as you go along, and
exactly.
you never get quite as creative as when you've no idea what it is you should or shouldn't be doing. Once you've spent years and years already playing video games, you think you know what video games are, and that restricts what you even imagine a video can be. It's why something like Katamari Damacy was so brilliantly wild because the guy who made it was just a conceptual artist who knew nothing about video games and so just came up with a wild idea um, uh, for this absolutely marvelous video game. Yeah,
And so, having said those things, let's go to a specific game you've worked on, and let's move on to Discworld Noir, which we have already referenced, and it's one of my favorite games. And I finally, actually, I found the box. I found this ancient box of mine, which is still wonderful. It has its manual and everything, and it's one of the best adventure games ever.
that's very kind of you to
And
say.
seriously,
I don't know if it's true, but it's
it
very kind
is.
of you to say.
It's a very objective thing. I'm saying it follows years of research on the genre, and it's brilliant.
Well,
And
thank you. I mean,
I
this
can,
is my first game as lead
I
designer,
know,
and my first game as narrative designer, and my first game as script writer. But I had every possible assistance. I was a young, arrogant bastard when I was in London, and I did not deserve to get this project, but I got it, and I made the most of it, and that's what I can say about it. Because on the one hand, on the game design front, I had support from Greg Barnett, who was effectively my mentor in games design, and he'd worked on for 8-bit games from the very beginning. He worked on one of the versions of The Hobbit for Melbourne House and the Horus games. If you're a Spectrum player, you presumably know the Horus games.
yes,
So I worked under Greg Bonnet on design, and then of course on story, I had Terry Pratchett as my editor, which I did not deserve and still don't deserve, and feel very, very honoured to have had that opportunity.
which
And he
is
was such a great editor. I mean, I am pleased with the script I wrote, but it would have not been half as good if Terry hadn't taken very seriously the idea that this was a story worth polishing up, right? Many people had a very disrespectful view of video games, and Terry did not. He actually really enjoyed the form, and yeah, he took I wrote the script in a little over a month, but working flat out like 12-hour days for a little over a month, so that he could take the script away when he was on holiday in Australia, where apparently he edited it in his hotel room while he was away in Australia, and the edits were incredible. I learned so much from that editing process. I made he made so much of what I had written better with the tiniest of tweaks, just the smallest of
mm,
tweaks. And he also was willing to put in jokes far dirtier than I thought I could get away with. Yeah, there's a handful of dirty jokes in this game, but the filthiest always came from Terry. He was more than happy to get
that's
to go there,
amazing.
which really surprised me, because the books, and I while I was flushing goldfish at Perfect Entertainment, the other thing I was doing was reading Discworld novels.
Did you read everything? I mean, in order to get the tone right, did you actually
Yeah,
like
absolutely. I
go?
mean, I did all. I did almost nothing for a year, but read Discworld novels and watch film noir movies, which obviously was a terrible trial.
Yeah, I can imagine. It's like, yeah, it's hell. It's like,
The thing that I, from a game design and narrative perspective, the thing that I was most pleased about in Discworld Noir is the notebook.
mm,
Many people have singled out the scent inventory, because, for spoilers, you turn into a werewolf in the game, and there's a bunch of puzzles involving scent. And so lots of people praised the scent inventory, but I really liked the notebook. I thought this was a really novel idea at the
it
time,
was.
because up until then, all the point and click adventures had used objects for puzzles. You'd have an inventory of objects, and it was about where you would use the objects or how you would combine the objects. Because it was a detective game, and because I also read all the Raymond Chandler and a bunch of the Dashiell Hammett novels as well, I really wanted us to get that gumshoe investigative feel, and I needed a tool to do it. And it struck me that an inventory of clues, which is what the notebook is, would enable us to do some really good storytelling, where the topics in the notebook would be topics of conversation for characters, and you could use that to uncover new things. And it really disappointed me that the reviewers were not interested in the notebook and only interested in the scent inventory. And then I was at an event I was speaking at, I want to say it was in Develop in Brighton, which I spoke at, and Dave Gilbert of Wadjet Eye was at the event, and he told me that the notebook in Discworld Noir was the inspiration for the notebook in the Blackwell Legacy,
Black
which is the
Legacy.
first of
Yeah.
the 6 Blackwell games. I was so happy. It was I actually somebody noticed that the notebook was an interesting design idea and actually made use of it. So
Yeah.
that made me very, very happy.
See, and you will also be happy to find out that Chris Christodoulou, who's not you, he's a different Chris, who's a musician in games, also writes in the chat that the notebook is absolutely brilliant.
Mm.
So I think that, I mean, I was under the impression, and this is the first time that I hear it, that everyone sort of loved the notebook, and they loved the fact that they
If
get.
they did, they didn't tell me. I mean, this is
Well,
Dick
they
Costa
should
stuff.
have. It's
It's quite possible that they really did enjoy the notebook, but didn't actually bother to mention it to me when I was talking to them about it. The other thing I really like about this one, Noir, from a design front, so from practical reasons, Greg put a restriction on me, which was the cutscenes are expensive to produce, so every player must see every cutscene. But other than that, he gave me permission to make the structure of the game as non-linear as I liked, as long as every player sees every cutscene. Boy, did I enjoy that. That was enormous fun. It's got a really, really non-linear structure whereby the cases have a logic to them. So there's a
Mm,
sequence that the cases unfold, but the order in which the cases unfold is actually quite flexible. And all the way through, wherever I could come up with multiple ways that the investigation might proceed, they're all supported to the extent that I didn't know all of the ways that all of the puzzles could be solved because I'd thrown in every possible way. Every way that one clue could lead to another was supported in the game, including, putting clues on the map and making a mental, having
mm,
Luton, the investigator, make a mental connection between the clue and the map. I love that about this game. I love that the puzzles are a little bit diffuse. It's I don't have control over them, right? Most puzzles are really
mm,
locked down, and you know what the solutions are. And this also, I think, fed into the design for the other game that I did with Greg Barnett after he left Perfect, which is Ghostmaster, which is probably my finest work as a game designer, even though it's also deeply flawed because I'm still quite early career and made some silly mistakes. Although I'm sure many people don't consider them mistakes.
Do
Yeah.
tell, because I mean, I was thinking, in preparation of this discussion, I was thinking that Ghostmaster is a game that somehow employs its economy in a way that actually structures it's the way the story emerges in an almost three act structure. I mean, you start with simple pranks and things, and then things pick up until you reach the climax and you win. And that happened almost naturally within the game.
So the basic problem with Ghostmaster, the thing that's well, actually, the thing that really hurt Ghostmaster. Let me skip to the end and give you the spoilers. The thing that
Mm,
really spoiled it was Empire Interactive, who were the publisher, got into a fight with Vivendi Universal, who were the US distributor, and Vivendi said, right, well, we're not supporting any of your games, even the ones that we've contractually signed up, and they did. They refused. They released them because they were contractually obligated to, but they didn't promote them. So despite having a 90% review score in the US PC Gamer, Ghostmaster launched onto the back shelves of stores in the US. And I was in the US when it launched, and there was no fuss. You had to know that the game existed because it was on the back shelves and not in the
mm,
display cases at the front, because the publisher had to pay the stores to get access to front of display. That really hurt us. But from a design perspective, the issue was that Greg had come up through point and click adventures and knew puzzles. He knew puzzles better
mm.
than I ever will, and really wanted the puzzles in the game. But those puzzles were a real barrier to people progressing through the game. And in fact, I know Ghostmaster's biggest fan base is in Poland. So, for the reasons I just outlined, it sank in the US. But a small, obscure company called CD Projekt Red, who you may have heard of,
Probably, yeah.
licensed the game in Poland, added the Polish language version to it, and marketed it to kids who loved it. And so I've got a huge number of Polish Ghostmaster fans, which I was thrilled to discover. And they're lovely people as well, the Ghostmaster fan base. But even I've spoken to them. Many of them didn't finish the game because some of the puzzles were so difficult to find solutions to. But the parallel with this one is this again idea of multiple routes to puzzle solutions. All of the puzzles in Ghostmaster can be solved in multiple different ways, although some of them are really quite
Yeah,
difficult to
and this
follow up.
is where we also have to tell people who don't know that Ghostmaster is this you are actually the Ghostmaster and you have to use ghosts to scare people
Yeah,
away,
it's
right?
it's Mission Impossible with ghosts, right? So
Exactly.
you arrive in a house and there's a whole bunch of mortals hanging around in there. In fact, the ghost of the star of the piece. So this is the poster that came with the deluxe set, which shows all the ghosts in the game, and they're an absolutely wonderful rogues gallery of ghosts. But I think part of the mistake was the inspiration, the way Greg sold the game, and the sensible market move to some extent was that this was piggybacking on The Sims, right?
Mm.
Except Greg and I, being conventional game designers, did not, I think, fully wrap our head around what made The Sims unique. And instead, what I largely based the game design on was Pokemon. Um, In fact, Greg stopped me from making it full on RPG, really, which I would have done if he hadn't controlled me, and he was right to stop me on that front. But this whole fact that the game is bridged by puzzles, I think, is a liability with the audience, because you just get to a place where you can't get any further because the puzzles are so difficult to solve, and that makes me a little bit sad. But I
Mm.
think the thing is, given the circumstances of this game, we were doomed the moment that fight between Empire and Vivendi broke out, right? So worrying about little things in the game design that could have been different is just until you invent me a possible world time machine and I can slip sideways and look at the alternatives. It's all just sort of unraveling the fabric of reality. I'm really proud, though, of Ghostmaster. I love the design of the game. I love the ghosts in this. I love scaring the mortals. I played it with my kids for Halloween. I don't know if it was last year or the year before. I think it was the year before last. Played it with my kids. They had a blast with it.
Yeah.
And it was really good fun. And it is really good fun.
It is,
I
and it's not scary because I mean you are the person who's trying to scare
No,
the others,
no,
so
this is
it's
it.
not
You're
scary.
the
It's
one
not at
scaring.
all.
The,
Exactly.
the, the, the experience of the game is not fear. It's not, it's Schadenfreude. It's
Yes. Yes.
you're
Exactly.
laughing at the misfortunes of other people, and it's really, really good fun. Even to this day, there's a subtle but obscure mechanic where you can drive mortals insane, and then the mortals do the scaring instead of the ghosts. And I really enjoy tackling some of these hauntings by driving the most unhinged mortal mad and having them drive everyone out of the house. I take a perverse delight in doing that. It's really good fun.
But also, I mean, now that you mention it, this Sims reference, this makes a lot of sense because I mean, I do remember, and it has been quite some time since I last played the Sims, the Sims, Ghostmaster. Is that it? The things that the NPCs did were quite complex. They were reacting to the TV going bonkers, and
Yeah,
they interacted with each other. They got mad at each other. I mean, they did things. They
yeah.
felt very very believable, which really added a lot to the overall let's scare them
That
experience.
is
Yeah,
where the Sims influence comes in, right? Because
yeah.
the joy of the Sims is that virtual dollhouse and watching the characters react and behave. And I think that side of it comes off really well. But I don't think that we'd quite understood really where
Mm.
the core of that virtual doll's house appeal was. And to
Yeah.
some extent, I'm kind of glad that we didn't. Because if we had understood that, we wouldn't have made Ghostmaster, and that would have been a shame. So I think to a certain extent, I'm pleased the way that we did go, because it's such a lovely artifact, and there's really nothing like it. Nobody has ever made a game quite like
I
Ghostmaster.
think, I mean, I know that it's available on GOG and apparently Steam, but I think
Yes.
there was also an updated version that was supposed to come out at some point.
No, there is a new updated version now. It's been remastered because it was getting a bit ropey. Nobody involved in the original game worked on the
Yeah.
remastering, but many people who are part of the Ghostmaster fan base worked on the remastering, which is
Okay,
great.
that's
Yeah,
nice. That's
yeah.
nice.
So that's pretty cool, actually. Yeah, pretty cool.
Okay, fantastic. Now let's, if you want, move on to something that I always enjoy discussing, which is one of your less known games, probably, which would have to be Silk. And with that, let's also talk a bit about actual indie games.
Yes. So,
Like much smaller, much simpler games without evil publishers, or
well,
with
yeah.
smaller publishers at least.
Yeah, but smaller games, cheaper games.
Yeah.
International Hobo has twice published low-budget games. The second one was still, which I'll talk about in a moment, which was developed for £15,000, which is about 20,000 euros, which is a sneeze in video game development terms. But that is very expensive compared to our original indie game. This is not a shot of Minecraft you're seeing here, but our indie game Play with Fire, which we developed for £5,000, which is about 7,000 euros. And this is a really unique, unusual game that also sank without a trace. But because we went with Manifesto Games, which is Greg Kostikan's company,
I
Greg
remember that.
Kostikan who made Paranoia, talking about tabletop role-playing games. Greg Kostikan made the Paranoia role-playing game, and he quit his job at a phone company because they were driving him crazy to found an indie publisher. And I thought, God, I want to publish an indie game with an indie publisher. That sounds fantastic. But the trouble was, neither he nor I, nor anyone else involved, really understood what was involved in setting up an indie
Hmm.
publisher. Because this 2005, 2006, There is no such thing as an indie publisher at this
No.
point in time, and nobody has worked out how to do it. There's no Steam, right? So it was actually, he was ahead of the curve. He came in too soon. If he'd done it just slightly later, it could have been a different story. But I am really pleased with Play with Fire.
And I do remember Greg's attempt at actually selling indie games. I do remember him claiming, that he has to put his money where his mouth is, and he has to
Yes,
take the risk.
yeah,
And
absolutely, and he did,
and
and
he
he did.
did.
I was glad to back him, and it's unfortunate that we couldn't make it work. But the timing was all wrong. The infrastructure was not there to distribute these indie games. The payment systems were not really in place, and I didn't have any money. Like I say, £5,000 I made this game on. But it does amuse me how much it looks like Minecraft. This is years before Minecraft, and so many people told me that nobody wants to play a game made out of 1 meter square blocks. Like, well, funny you should say that.
It's like that, the famous Beatles code. Those guitarist groups, they won't do anything ever. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't think this exists in any surviving form today. I'm pretty sure you can't play it. But it's a game about burning stuff to the ground. And the game is divided into 3 routes. There's a puzzle route where you have to burn things in the right way to get through, and the puzzles get quite difficult. There's an action route whereby it's all up against the clock, because once you set fire to the stuff you're on, the platforms under you will burn or melt or disappear, and you've got to get through before it melts. And there's a fun route, which is no puzzles and no challenge, and is just lots of weird stuff to melt for the fun of it. And I really wish circumstances had been slightly different, and that we'd had a chance to do more with this. But it did turn up in a traveling showcase of artistically motivated games. I don't know that this is an artistically motivated game, but it was fun being in the Indie Gate exhibition.
It's why shouldn't it be considered one? I mean, the purpose of its creation is to entertain people.
Yes, but art and entertainment are traditional enemies, right? The reason that movies took so long to claim artistic status was that they were clearly an entertainment medium, and so cultural gatekeepers were snippy about it. It was only when films started to be real bummers about everything that they started to be taken more seriously artistically. Although my wife and I are watching 2001: A Space Odyssey at the moment, which is just as a commercial endeavor. People must have been looking at Kubrick and thinking, so you've got 20 minutes, you've got a whole reel at the start of the film with apes on the African savannah, and then we cut into space.
Yes.
Yeah.
But this is where I have to argue that if you have, having read the book before watching the movie, which was something that you wouldn't be able to have done back then.
Yeah.
Right. Helps a lot, because, while the monkeys are going wild, you can sort of replay the whole subplot with early humans.
It is totally an adaptation of the book, and the book does help with it. But if you approach it as a movie, you have to wonder why. You're an hour in before the story actually starts. It is great. It looks great. I don't want to knock it. But Anyway, we didn't come to talk about 2001: A Space Odyssey. I just mentioned it. So we actually got to play with fire off Silk, which was a Kickstarter project. This was one of these side projects. The thing was, what I wanted to do was I wanted to pay tribute to this British programmer called Mike Singleton, who was an absolute genius. We talked earlier about how in the early days of video games, the constraints of the hardware were enormous, and yet Mike was able to get these incredible. This game, Lords of Midnight, which I've got the screenshot up from, is the best adaptation of Lord of the Rings without the Lord of the Rings license, and it fits in, I want to say 48K, because it runs on the ZX Spectrum, right? 48K. You can't make a Word document that will fit within 48K. I loved a whole bunch of games that Mike made, and I wanted to pay tribute to what he'd done. I wanted to take the unbelievable low rent engine that did the visuals for Lords of Midnight, the so-called landscaping engine, and I wanted to make a game that used landscaping as a basis for it, and that's where Silk came from. It was another completely mad, insane project that probably should never have happened, and amazingly, we made the Kickstarter and got the £15,000, but that wasn't anywhere near enough to actually do everything that was required for the game. I'm enormously grateful to our friends at Huey Games, who I was able to strike a deal with them whereby basically they garnished the sales on each platform to pay for the port of the next platform, so that we could deliver on each platform. We told the backers, because originally what I thought was, if we can get the Kickstarter passed, I'll go to a
Mm.
publisher and we'll sell the game to them. But this game is the wrong game to sell to publishers. It's not. This is a game that can only succeed on its own terms. A publisher has no reason to publish this
But I
game.
mean,
You played it, right, Konstantinos? You were
yes,
one of
of
the
course.
Kickstarter backers, I think.
Yes, yes, and it's. I mean, we. If I were to sell it to a publisher, I'd tell them that this is one of the largest open worlds ever conceived,
We like to say it's the
which it
largest
is.
handcrafted open world ever made.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
that's not a false argument. This is very, very true. So,
But you can see in the background there that is the actual map of the game,
yeah.
stretching from the eastern boundaries of the Roman Empire through the Parthian Empire, which is the predecessors to the Persian Empire, the Kushan in the middle, all the way to the Han, the Chinese Empire in the Taklamakan Desert, which is the eastern side of the Silk Route. I'd always had a love of this period, 200 AD.
Mm.
I love the idea that you've got three kingdoms, China, on the east end of the Silk Road, and you've got ancient Greece, ancient Rome, and the early stages of the Persian Empire on the western side of it. It's such a romantic time period. I don't know why we don't see more films and TV series using this time period. Anyway.
Well, yeah. Anyway, very quickly, since you mentioned crowdfunding, and there's this question, it's like I have opinions, but no one wants to hear them right now. It's like the question is, what would you say are the essential steps to crowdfunding a game nowadays? And I would
I
also
would
add,
say
is
the
it?
essential steps are to run screaming in the other direction and not attempt it.
Yeah.
So right. Uh, in games, there is an area where crowdfunding is enormously successful, and it is board games.
Mhm.
Board games via Kickstarter and similar platforms has completely disrupted the board game publishing model to a degree that nobody could have anticipated, and to an extent that has made board game stores to actually tear out their hair in frustration, because the games that are hits they don't have access to because they sold through Kickstarter and they can't stop them unless there's a second printing. But board games absolutely work on Kickstarter. It has worked brilliantly for it, and it's surprising how many games I end up buying each year made their start in crowdfunding in board games. In video games, not so much. The games that pull in good funding in Kickstarter and similar places tend to have some person who made games in the past associated with it, and so some nostalgia to put the funding in. There are exceptions. I admit that there are exceptions, but for every game that gets funding out of Kickstarter, there are 100, maybe 1,000 that sink without a trace. I can't recommend it for a video game project, not least of which because, as I learned with the Silk project, once you succeed in the Kickstarter, you are completely constrained on that project in ways that make it far harder to deliver than if you didn't have that constraint.
And I would argue that since video games tend to often spiral out of control and bloat, and they face technical problems that an RPG or a tabletop game would never face.
Yeah,
Right, they're much
absolutely.
simpler projects. You can really budget them in a very concrete way. Whereas with video games, it's incredibly difficult, and it has also lost all credibility. I mean, we have seen lots of major video game projects falter
Yeah.
and even completely fail. on Kickstarter. So
Yeah, it's just, and this is the problem. The scope, the scale, and the challenges a video game project faces are so much more than they are for a tabletop project. I believe crowdfunding has been a boon to the board game industry, but I believe that it is a dangerous path for a video game
mhm,
company to pursue.
mhm,
Here's the thing: if you are interested in making video games and you want to do a Kickstarter behind it, talk to half a dozen companies that already run Kickstarters before you do it. Do not commit to it naively. Talk to people who've done it before you do anything
mhm,
else. It is a much tougher road than you think. I'm glad that I did it because I got to pay tribute to Mike Singleton, which I really wanted to do. Although I feel like I burnt goodwill with my company by making this bizarre oddity. But I wanted to do it. And also, talking about Lords of Midnight, I have to mention Proteus, which I believe you've played
mhm.
as well. So this is
Yes,
Ed
yes.
Key and David Tanaga's art game. So good, and inspired by Lords of Midnight. Bizarrely, it's got nothing in common with Lords of Midnight, but Ed Key, the programmer, started out in a landscaping engine, just like I did with Silk. And then it morphed into this bizarre art game project about experiencing an island in 4 seasons. I love Proteus to bits. I think that this is a really fantastic art game. If I hesitate to consider Play with Fire an art game, I do not hesitate to call Proteus a really marvelous work of art.
And I think it is a very well known game. It was one of the first indie games to really get recognition, to really reach lots of
It came at
people.
a good time,
Yeah.
right? It came at a time where there were fewer people making video games, and so the really interesting
Mhm.
stuff that was around could get attention. Yeah.
Yep, and it's still a fantastic experience, even though it doesn't really come with challenge or anything,
No, there's no challenge
and
to
you
it
don't
whatsoever.
need it
It's a
exactly.
pure experience. But people talk about whether or not video can make you cry. I cried from the sheer beauty of this game. Maybe I'm an old softie, but I sat on the hill with the shaman watching this the sunrise, and I just cried from the sheer beauty of this game. I just thought it was just amazing. But I have to say, the lo-fi graphics quality of it, I think the fact that I grew up with the 8-bit and the 16-bit games is part of the appeal to me, because this takes that lo-fi aesthetic and runs with it really well.
Mm.
Yeah.
And and this is something that's very interesting to me. I mean, both you and I sort of explain why we enjoy Silk or Proteus due to our fondness
What
of
did you enjoy about Silk Constantinos? I'm
I
curious.
it's the fact that you get to visit all those cities. You get to sort of it's what I would have imagined as an updated version that's not fantasy based of the Lords of Midnight. It's
No.
like Lords of Midnight 3, which actually existed in some quasi 3D form, but it wasn't bad.
Yes, the
It wasn't
Citadel.
bad. It
Yeah.
wasn't bad. But it's that it actually gave you this sense. But I would argue, again, following perhaps Greg Kostikin's idea that games are not fruit. They don't spoil if you leave them for a few years.
Yeah.
I think that this low fidelity, but this structured low fidelity actually gives your imagination this wonderful scaffolding on which to add all those little things that really make you sort of own the world, because
Yeah.
it's not, you are in the world. It's an interactive thing. You're interacting with things, you're doing things. You have all the space to express your feelings and the things that you imagine there in a way that's much more satisfying if you want the, I don't know, I'll say GTA 5, right? Which I don't, I'm not a huge fan of the series, but that's besides the point. It's like things are not as defined, and they
Yeah.
allow me to do that. And I imagine that people who don't have the nostalgic reasons to go and visit this type of games, I am pretty certain that they would also enjoy them.
Well, I tell you what, it's interesting. So, Play with Fire, as I already highlighted,
Hmm.
was a colossal flop for us. It was just too soon for Manifesto games, but we have turned a profit on Silk, and it isn't from people from the retro gamers. Although we could never have made it without the retro gamers, because they were the ones who backed the Kickstarter. It is younger players who just fell in love with the sense of a world in which I can go out and do whatever. Right, I can go and trade between the Parthian Empire and the
Hmm.
Kushan
Hmm.
Empire, or I can build huge armies, march them out in the desert, and then die because I failed to supply enough food to run an army of that size. So there are. I was surprised how many younger fans have contacted me and actually did really get into it. It's not like other games out there. It's not visceral. It really. This is
No.
a game that requires you to think about the world that you're in and the things that you can do, because the only things you can do are the things that you could do in 200 AD, right? You can buy goats and milk them. It's but yeah, I was surprised that there have been people who actually really love the slow pace of this game, because this is a slow game, right?
Yeah.
It takes a long time to play a game of Silk, but you can also pick up and put down. I should go back and have another game of it. You know, I've got it on the Switch. I think it would be quite good fun for me to go back and revisit this. But yeah, it was
I think you'll appreciate it much more now. Like
now
almost.
that the horror of the
Yeah.
Kickstarter is behind
Exactly.
me.
Exactly. Exactly. No, but seriously, I mean, would you say that attempting to go indie, or actually trying to work in indie games, or generally speaking, enter or survive in the industry there is a good idea? Is it a viable professional
It,
option?
is it viable? Absolutely. In fact, there's never been a better time to be an indie game developer, in my view. But is it sensible? If you've already got a job and are getting paid, probably not. The thing is, there's a bit. It's very much like the gold rush, right? So
Mm.
people went west in the US in the late 1800s, to in the hope of striking gold and making it rich. And some indie companies will indeed make it rich. But do you know who really made it rich out of the gold rush? It was the people who had shops and sold mining equipment, the people who went to go and pan for gold. So you absolutely can succeed as an indie at the moment, but it is not easy. Competition is
Mm.
high, discoverability is low. In particular, if you are the kind of person who wants to sit in your room, make a game, put it out there and hope that people will find it, you will have the same experience we had with Play with Fire. They will not
Yeah.
discover it. The people who are succeeding in games are willing to go out and talk about and show their game and put it out in people's hands. If you can't do that, if no one working on the project can do that with you, you will struggle. But good news, there are lots of publishers supporting indie development at the moment. And if you can make a plausible vertical slice of a game, a part of your game that shows what's really great about it, or even a beautiful corner. This is a phrase I got from Rob Houston at Huey Games. Love this term, beautiful corner.
Mm.
Just a part of a game that shows how great it could be if you finished it. There are lots of publishers out there who can provide you resources, and not only the budget to make the game, but the critical perspective to stop you doing stupid things in the project as well, right? You can succeed as an indie. I think this is a great time to be an indie, but you've got to be smart about it. Do not listen to those indie developers who say, oh, go and make the game that you love and it will succeed. Well, it worked for them, or you wouldn't have heard them say it, right? It's the very fact that they succeeded that allows them to sell this completely spurious message. It's survivorship bias, right?
Exactly.
You will not succeed just by making the game that you want. I promise you that you must be much smarter than that. That you can succeed as an indie, but there's a lot more to it than just making the game that you want, right? But
And
equally, flip side to that is don't go out and make a game that you don't want to make, because you may as well pull out your teeth one at a time. Frankly,
that's true.
you
But
make a
also, I
game you want
have
to
to
make.
point out.
Make it smart. Be clever about what is selling in video games and what a small project can achieve on a reasonable timescale. And do meet with publishers. There are loads of publishers on the small scale, and many of them are really good partners. Yeah,
And,
good time to be an indie.
and truth be said, I mean, success does not necessarily mean that you will get rich. I mean, someone
No,
like David, who
I
who,
mentioned
who
What Get
mentioned.
I earlier, right?
Exactly.
They don't consider themselves to be half as successful as I consider them to be. But they lived. I mean, Dave has moved out of New York, I believe now. But I
Yeah,
mean,
he
they lived
has.
in New
He
York
has.
for many years. They made indie point and click adventures and could afford to rent in New York. That's pretty amazing, frankly. That's incredible. That's success as far as I'm concerned, because
Exactly.
they had their autonomy and independence and were are making great games. That's
Exactly.
fantastic. So yeah,
It's
you can succeed as an indie, but do not go in naively. Be smart. Talk to existing indies. Look at what's working in the marketplace. Make a game that you're confident an audience is going to be there. Do not do what I did with Silk and make a wild, mad game that may or may not have players. I only did it because I felt I had to. I'm glad I did it, but as a commercial endeavor, it was
yeah.
not going to be a big money maker. But that's not what it was about. Anyway.
True. So I think that we've talked about some of your games at least, or we can't talk about all the games you've worked on. It must
No,
include.
there's more than
Uh,
100, and many
yeah,
of them are not that interesting to talk about.
and
No one's going to want to talk about Cubics racing robots, I'm pretty sure. You remember Cubics, of course, the South Korean cartoon that didn't even get... No, nobody does.
absolutely yes, of course. But yeah, but I mean, still, that's a lot of games, and we now also know that there's also a variety of tabletop games which I never imagined that existed. So, but let's talk about other people's games. So, effectively, do you have games that you really love? I mean,
You
besides
know I
Baldur's
do.
Gate,
No,
I
nobody
know
ends
you
up working in
do.
games that and doesn't have games they really love.
Yes.
And
So,
since we've talked so much about 8 bits, I've got to do this lovely thing. This is
yes, Paradroid.
Paradroid by Andrew Braybook. This is incomprehensible to look at. I appreciate, but this is a game in which you are the 001 influence droid, which you can see in the top left,
Exactly.
and you go onto a starship and take control of another robot, which you then gain all the powers of that robot, but only for a certain amount of time, because then you burn out the robot you're in and have to take over another robot. And you do it with this really inventive influence game whereby you basically battle for control of the circuits of the robot that you're on. This is an incredible piece of work. And this was published by, talk about Huey Games, it was published by Houston Consultants, which is Rob Houston's dad. That was his company. And this is such a brilliant game. I have not yet proved that this was an influence on the original GTA, but I am reasonably sure it was. One day I'm going to find the person who was working there, who said, "Oh yeah, I played Paradroid." This idea, the GTA idea, it seems trivial, right? That you would be able to take control of
Mm.
different cars and drive around, because everything does it now. But not before GTA. There was nothing in which you took control of other people's cars before GTA. I believe that influence came from Paradroid. I can't prove it. I can't prove it, but I do believe it.
That makes sense, and also I'm pretty certain that there was an excellent port, like a straightforward port of Paradroid on the Wii, and it was the Commodore 64 version.
So Huey Games again. So Huey, they had some luck with Kickstarters. They partnered up with a company that they knew were making a Paradroid game. This might not be the game you're thinking of, but they certainly did do this. They made they ran a Kickstarter and shipped a Paradroid game. I think it was a sort of spiritual successor rather than a straight up port.
I
I'm not certain.
I remember
Where,
playing the C64 version on the Wii, or
oh, okay. Well,
not the
so
Amiga one, nothing
maybe,
fancy. Like,
so there is a company, and Antstream has rights to old games. It's possible that there is a straight up version of it available on one of the platforms that's out there. Antstream are great for sharing old games. They've got a really clever platform together there. Uh,
I don't think you need a client or anything.
No, you
Like,
think it was a standalone?
it's
Well,
true.
I've got to find this then. I love the idea that there might be a standalone version of Paradroid
But it
on the
was on the
Switch. You
Wii.
think
No,
on
no,
the
not the
Wii?
Switch, the Wii,
Oh, on the
the
Wii.
Wii.
Not the best platform,
Nope.
unfortunately. No. Okay, that's very exciting. Other games that I like, because we've gone on a long
Go on,
time, and
sure.
I'm sure I should get through them. The other thing I like is 1982. The year 1982 is, I think, the finest year in video games. I've said before, I'm a child of the arcades. 1982 games like Ms. Pac-Man, Tron, Time Pilot, Dig Dug, Mr. Do. I love Mr. Do. Qbert, Burger Time, Xevious and Zaxxon, and my personal favourite from 1982, Joust.
Wow.
Joust. I love this game, and I've always loved this game. And I finally, a few years ago, got onto the top of the high score table of a Joust machine. I finally did it. It took me all my life, but I am now a good enough Joust player that I can actually get onto the high score table, provided nobody else who's played the game was actually really good at it.
Okay, still that we have to explain to people that this is effectively Flappy Bird with lances and
Yeah,
auspices,
absolutely.
right?
Yeah, Flappy Bird with lances. What an excellent description.
It's
But it's got a wild control scheme because you do basically have to just push the button to flap up. But you win in a collision with another bird if your lance is above their lance. So it is a game of very careful control, because if you go up to the top of the screen, you'll bounce off the top of the screen and come down, and then the other bird comes in, knocks you off, you're dead. Right? It is the ultimate game of chicken. It's incredibly precise. It's incredibly difficult. It is two-player co-op as well, but you do kill the other player if your lance hits the other player, which is maddening. And the game meanly has these gladiator waves where it incentivizes you to kill the other player, which if you play Joust, you do not do, right? You don't do. You paid a credit to play this game. Do not turn on each other just because the game bribes you to do it. Work together. Victory comes to those who cooperate. Bloody love Joust. What a great game.
I haven't played
And
in ages.
other games that I enjoy, I currently am completely obsessed with Fire Emblem Path of Radiance.
Okay.
Radiance. This came out on the GameCube emulator that's on the Switch too. I have a GameCube. In fact, there's a GameCube right back there, but the laser is broken in it, and I cannot find anyone who will repair a laser in a GameCube. I did not get to play Fire Emblem Path of Radiance when it came out, and in fact have never played a Fire Emblem because initially it was likened to Advance Wars, which I was fairly neutral on, and so I kind of ignored it. But I am obsessed with Fire Emblem Path of Radiance. I am currently on my 4th playthrough for this game. Every time I'm picking a different set of characters and building a different party that plays the game in a different way. I
I
can't
have
believe how much
never.
time I put into this.
Okay, so I would say that this is something you would recommend.
I recommend it if you like Japanese strat RPGs. I love strat RPGs, but I
Mhm.
normally do not play them because my wife only lets me play one RPG a year because I get obsessive about them, as I have got obsessive about Fire Emblem Path of Radiance. And as a result, it is dangerous to let me play more than one in a year because I still have to work and look after my family and so forth. So yeah, this is my RPG for this year, and I am loving it. If you like Japanese RPGs and turn-based grid battles, if you like Japanese strat RPGs, basically, this is an absolute brilliant game. And the narrative design is so inventive as well. I absolutely love that the different characters in this game, if they fight next door to each other in the battlefield, develop a relationship and you get conversations between them that adds depth to their characters, after which they then fight better if they are placed next to each other in the battlefield. What a genius piece of narrative design. It's so simple. It works so well.
So
Yeah.
very quickly, I have to say that KZ221,
Yes.
who actually says you're the best lecturer ever, so he
Oh,
probably knows
that's
that.
very kind of them to say so.
He says, "Show us your collection," which I would say would not be very practical at the
What, the
moment,
collection behind me?
but it's there. Yeah.
It is there. I don't think I can realistically go through
No.
my collection, but yes, there's not the whole collection because there's another bookshelf upstairs with another bunch of games on, but it's a fair chunk of it. I tell you what, we've gone on for a long time.
Yes,
I feel like
that's fine.
since we've mentioned strat RPGs, my previous favorite strat RPG was Front Mission 3, which is a mech-based strat RPG. An absolutely
Okay.
great game, but a game that has particular significance to me because even though the two games have nothing in common, Front Mission 3 is the biggest influence on Cult Heretic Kingdoms, which was an RPG that I worked on. So what it is in Front Mission 3, you mount weaponry on your mechs, and those weaponry have a chance of activating a special power, which then unlocks, and you can use it to configure your party. Right? Great system.
Mhm.
Loved that. stole it for Cult Heretic Kingdoms. And Cult got a sequel as well with Shadows Heretic Kingdoms, which not every game I work on it founds a franchise. It's pretty cool that I got to work with Tom Baker and got to found an RPG franchise with it as well. But since it's relevant to why we started having this conversation in the first place, which is that you've invited me
True.
to teach a game design masterclass at D6. This is a great example of what I mean by player practices, which is one of the three things that I'm going to do in the masterclass, is introduce people to this way of thinking about games, right? So Cult Heretic Kingdoms and Front Mission 3 have very little in common, right? Very little in common. But there was a practice in it, that of choosing weapons, using it repeatedly until something unlocked, that I used in Cult Heretic Kingdoms in a completely different game, in a completely different way. This was a player practice, right? It's something that the player learns to do. And video games are absolutely packed full of these things. And learning to analyze them is terribly helpful for understanding video games. Here's just a small example. So the top game there is Panel de Pon, one of the greatest puzzle games ever to not achieve commercial success for some queer reason. It's by Intelligent Systems, who also make Fire Emblem. Brilliant team. Panel de Pon is fantastic. It's available on the Switches on the I want to say the SNES emulator, I think, Panel de Pon. It's a really great puzzle game, but expect to spend hours with it before you understand what it does. So it was a brilliant game, but it was difficult to learn to play. Pokemon Puzzle League came on the N64. It's basically the same game, but the people who ported it did not understand what the game was, which was a liability. But somebody understood it, because Bejeweled basically took the core of Panel de Pon and made it into the match 3 genre, one of the most successful mass market genres imaginable. And now, of course, it underpins Candy Crush Saga, which is a huge money-making machine. Here's another player practice stuff. This idea of finding sets of 3 and putting them together is something that players learn to do. And once they learn to do it, they can play it in all sorts of forms. There is a lineage of games that pioneered new ways of playing, and then these got refined until there was a really successful game on the end. Looking at games in this way is one way of thinking about game design to get more out of it. Another one I look at in the masterclass, the 10-player motives. This is an audience model we use at International Hobo when we're doing design audits. We assess the games in terms of which player experiences, which emotional experiences does the game evoke, right? Not every game evokes every emotion, but there's a particular profile that every game has in terms of the emotions it's evoked. Thinking in terms of these player motives is another way of looking at game design. It's a very different way of thinking about game design, and it's a very productive way. And then just to round out this shameless plug, narrative design is the third one. We talked about narrative design earlier, which was this idea that International Hobo developed and then managed to spread throughout the industry to no benefit whatsoever. And I've used as my example image there Pac-Man, because people do not think about Pac-Man having a narrative design, but it is. It's the greatest chase scene in any media. No Hollywood chase scene is as perfect as Pac-Man or Ms. Pac-Man. It captures all of those emotions of the chase experience in an incredibly intense and incredibly simple fashion. There's a game design masterclass. Konstantinos asked me if I wanted to do something with him, and I thought this would be fun. And so if you're interested in leveling up your game design skills, then come to the course presentation. Is it 2 weeks time now?
It's in 2 weeks time. I've just pasted the links in the chat, and you can also find them below the YouTube video. Those are the links to the classes. And now let me paste the link to the live course presentation where we will be discussing, what.
Yeah. So if you're interested in leveling up your game design skills, come along to the course presentation. I'll talk a little bit more about this masterclass.
Exactly.
It should be really good fun and really helpful at giving you ways to get the most out of your existing game design skills, right? That's what I aim to do here, is to give you different ways of thinking about game design so that you can improve your own skills. And right, we have gone on forever, Konstantinos.
Okay, so let's very quickly You are right, but it was. I mean, I entertained. I enjoyed myself immensely,
I
and
also enjoy myself because I got to talk about
so
myself. Who doesn't enjoy that?
thanks. Also, in case you were wondering, KZ221 would have to be Callum from the Bolton days,
Mm.
which tells me nothing, but obviously
That doesn't
tells you
narrow it
something.
down, Callum, because I taught about 12 students called Callum, although they were all excellent.
And there's also some from Bolton Uni here too. So apparently,
Well,
you're huge
I'm
in
glad to
Bolton.
see you all here. I'm glad to see that there are survivors from what I sometimes jokingly call the University of Mordor. Yes, it's I really enjoyed having you lot of students. You were ace. The students was the fun part about it. Yes.
Awesome. So seriously, I mean, and this will be my last question. And if anyone else wants to say something, and for Chris to comment on or answer on, just do it while I'm asking. So, final question would have to be, master classes aside and everything else. Like, do you have any interesting, intriguing, and announceable plans for the future, or roughly
Do
what does
I
it?
have plans for the future?
Yes.
Not that's likely to interest this audience. I tell you, right. I'm going to tell you what I'm actually working on at the moment as a new project. My friend Matt Mower, who has been a tech entrepreneur for a long time, and I are both. We're both AI skeptics. I studied AI at university, so I have good reason to be skeptical. And
Mhm.
we are looking at whether or not we can provide consultancy services for companies who are concerned about whether or not AI has impact on their business. So I'm looking at doing more or less what we do with design audits, but for
Hmm.
businesses, so that we can tell them basically, in many cases, you do not need AI. It's only going to hurt you if you try and use it in this context. But there are going to be a couple of cases where you can say, well, actually, you can incorporate this into your workflow and you might get benefit
Hmm.
from it.
Hmm.
But it's a very skeptical AI audit service that I'm developing with Matt's company, Agenda Scope, that I'm doing on the side, really, because Matt and I have long talked about doing a project together, and this struck us as a good opportunity. Not very interesting game wise, I realise, but that is what in truth, what I'm working on at the moment.
But
Is setting up this skeptical AI service for businesses.
have you perhaps considered updating the Virtuous Cyborg on with the second edition to tackle things like ChatGPT and large language models
I
and
don't virtuous. I don't think there'll be a second edition of Virtuous Cyborg, and I don't for reasons of politeness. I don't want to discuss why. Not that I wasn't very happy with that book. I am. I really enjoyed working on it. I really enjoyed the editor I had on the project. But for reasons that for politeness, I'm not going to discuss. I don't believe
okay,
that there'll be a second edition of that book.
fair enough.
But yeah, it's nice that you mentioned it at all. It's I, I made a mistake in that book in that I let myself get carried away with an idea that was much more complicated than I realized as I was writing it. That this idea of cyber virtue struck me as a really interesting way of thinking about technology ethics, but actually I think it's quite difficult to wrap their head around it. This idea that when you form a cyborg with a robot, right, with a computer, with an electronic tool, you form a cyborg with it, and that system has ethical implications that can be designed. That actually turns out to be a much more abstract and difficult to grasp concept than I realized when I was writing the book. Yeah.
Okay, okay. So, okay, Callum is specifying that he was in your first year of teaching, the ones you met up in Manchester, probably. Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
but let me see.
So you're
I
Callum from the year with Thomas Gidley and Rebecca Mayhew. Very good Callum. That year was a very good Callum. Yes.
one of the finest, actually. so, excellent.
A good vintage.
So let me see. I think we don't have any other questions. I think I've passed on most of the comments, and I think that we
Excellent.
can let you go back to working and your
Which good, because
family.
it's lunchtime here and I'm starting to get hungry, and I
And
can't live on
best.
ego alone. Will actually have to have some food at some point.
So seriously,
Honestly, great pleasure chatting to you today, Konstantinos.
Thanks for
Really
being
good
here.
discussion. I love that you're so well versed in the history of video games. Not enough people are well versed in the history of video games. There is a ton to learn about
Yeah,
the history of video games that remains relevant now.
I
In fact,
fully
only
agree.
a few years ago, a venture capitalist was telling an audience in the games industry that they were not taking game archaeology seriously, that they were not looking at good possibilities that existed in the past that have not been followed up on. So yeah, I heartily recommend
Mm.
a bit of game history. You teach, of course,
We
on
have,
game history
I
at
was about to
Discworld.
plug it. I mean, you make it so easy for me to plug it. Yeah, we do have a course that will be that's going to be taught this September actually
Yeah,
on game history. It's very condensed, but the idea is that we have to understand the medium. We have to see what has been done, what has
it,
been done and forgotten actually.
yeah, absolutely. And you would be surprised if your interest is game design. You'll be surprised how valuable it is to understand how previous games solved their design
Exactly.
problems. Even now, although I do play new releases, I mean, I've mentioned that I'm currently playing Fire Emblem from 2005, right? I still spend as much time playing old games as I do new games
Mm,
because there is so much to learn from the games that went previously. Yeah,
totally.
there's a lot to be said for it. Right. I think
Yeah.
people must surely need to eat like I do.
Yes.
Um,
So seriously, once again, thanks so much. Thanks so much for taking the time, and thank you all for being here. And I think it's lunchtime, or
or dinner time,
dinner
as it
time,
might
or
be.
depending where you are, it's going to be time to eat something. So thank you for being with us. Thanks so much, Chris. Thanks so much
My
uh,
pleasure. My absolute
for
pleasure.
this.
Hopefully, we can be in the same corner of space time together at some point and get some
Yes,
drinks.
I think we'll manage that again. I think we did it once in at an Adventure X.
Yeah, that's right. In London. Yeah.
Yep, and that's it.
But it's been a while, and I
Yeah,
think
that's
we
true.
should. If you're on my side of the Atlantic at any point, do let me know.
I will
Um,
try. I will try.
but you
I'm
don't
slightly
usually go.
scared of your side of the Atlantic, to be honest, right now. I am. I will be very honest about that. But, Canada is next door. Why not?
I'll be. I'm speaking in Canada in May. I've been invited to talk at XP Game Summit in Toronto in May, which
Okay.
I'm very much looking forward to.
That would be awesome.
Yes, I'm looking forward to going there, and I'm looking forward to drinking the good Canadian whiskies. It should be great.
Oh, God, fantastic. So thanks so much. And, eat carefully, everyone. Thanks for being here. And good night, good day, good afternoon, whatever it is, depending on
Stay
your time
wonderful,
zone.
everybody.
So, bye bye.